to the Web3 Prof Podcast.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm here, the Web3 Prof Podcast with Ethan Clark, who is the CEO and co-founder of Nations First. Thanks for being with me here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Ethan, before we get into Nations First, let's hear a little bit about your story. How did you get into Web3?
So, I used to live with my dad in this little studio apartment on Commercial Drive in East Vancouver, and it was one small room, and the bed was over here, the kitchen was right here, and my little I had one of those little Middle Eastern eating mats that was my mattress. And so I sat there, and it was an incredibly uncomfortable, if you could call it a bed, I guess a bed, and wasn't very easy to sleep on. So I would be up pretty often, and he would always fall asleep with his laptop on, watching these YouTube videos, usually, anything like geopolitics or just stuff on the economy. And as YouTube does, it goes sort of down the rabbit hole as the videos progress. And so by, 2 a.m, it was talking about Bitcoin and, sort of that technology. And so I was always begging my brothers, begging my dad and my mother to buy Bitcoin. And of course, I was young. I didn't have any money, and I couldn't really invest into it myself. But nobody listened to little Ethan's investment advice, although it was good investment advice.
What year do you think this was?
Oh man, this must have been. I would have been maybe 12. I'm 23 now.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I guess probably about 2014-ish.
Yeah.
Maybe a little earlier than that.
Wow.
So we eventually, once I had a little bit of money and my brother started getting into the space, we got into mining Ethereum, years later and trading sort of altcoins and buying Bitcoin and whatnot. So my family got quite invested into it after a while, and and then the whole sort of crash happened and left it alone for a while. But went through my work in politics, went through my work in the resource industry, and eventually sort of thought back. I wonder where crypto's at. I wonder where the sort of blockchain space is at, and thought based off of what I knew prior, that the sort of technology has potential for a lot of utility for the issues that I was seeing in politics, in resource developments, in just in the economic development space. And so took a look back at it, and now here I am.
That's amazing. What a cool story. So Nations First, tell us about, or explain to us, what is Nations First? What do you guys do?
Yeah, Nations First. So we work with First Nations communities, Indigenous communities. We tokenize their natural resources, their energy assets, their ecosystem, so all of their biodiversity, their carbon, their soil, their water, and we put that on our blockchain. We make it investable, we make it manageable, we make it governable, really bridging the gap between the investors, the First Nation itself, and the community, just to ensure that one, they're able to attract investment. It's going into the right places. The community and the nation are able to own the data. The investor has access to the data, and that money's going into the right places to ensure that while we are developing these resource projects or these energy projects, that it's actually benefiting the local economies.
So, so you're a First Nations person.
I'm Coast Salish.
Coast Salish. So, in the initiation of this company, how much of your cultural identity helped you form the vision behind this brand?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question, and one I always like to talk about. When we talk about culture, and specifically, Indigenous culture, we tend to think song, dance, art, these sorts of things. I like to kind of call them the things that are somewhat tolerated. And of course, they were taken away from us, and being able to practice that is immensely important. And I hold it very dear to me, and I make sure that I practice it, in my life. But there's all the other components of our economic systems, our governance structures, our relationship to the land, our relationship to the water, our relationship to the stars, our relationships to each other, that really make up our culture and guide our culture. And so when I look at Nations First, and I look at the ability, and just generally, looking at consensus mechanisms, being able to replicate our traditional governance structures that played such an important role in the creation of our and the guidance of our cultures, or our valuation systems based on how we actually value these different natural assets, how we value economic output, how we value social systems, and so it's very deeply rooted in really upholding and bringing back those sort of cultural values that have not been tolerated.
Is there a connection between what we commonly hear about in Bitcoin with the consensus mechanism and First Nations culture?
I think so. I think there's many distinct sorts of governance structures within our communities. Of course, we always, we see today sort of a cookie cutter approach through what's called the Indian Act, which is what our people currently live under. But there's these governance structures, which is, of course, the elected systems of chief and council. Now, our people didn't live that way before. We had, whether that be like a matrilineal or a patrilineal or, patriarchal societies where you were born to be like a hereditary chief. We call him a siyam. And you're the spokesperson for your people. You don't, you don't decide for your people, you speak for your people. And when we look at things like a delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism, that's a real opportunity to bring that back, to hold those people accountable while ensuring that the ones that actually have the ability to speak or to act are at the forefront, but always held accountable.
You said something, you don't speak you speak for your people, not, what did you say?
You're here to represent your people. You speak for your people, but you're always accountable to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So with Nations First, are you built on your own blockchain, or are you built on a layer 2? How does this work?
Yeah. So we're our own blockchain. We built it right from the ground up. When we were starting, that was a big question. Are we going to build on another network?
So it's not a layer 2 on Ethereum.
No,
this is your own blockchain.
This is entirely our own blockchain.
And is it called Nations First Blockchain?
It's called Nations First Network.
Nation First Network. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that go about? You've obviously hired some fairly technical people, or you're fairly technical to pull this off.
I'm a non-technical. I know just enough.
You know some smart people.
I know some smart people. I know some good people. We started off. We had a big vision. Wanted to do a lot. Really found went out. Found the right people. They were super supportive, and they've done some amazing technical work that I could not even begin to describe.
How important has it been to you in hiring First Nations people or working with First Nations people versus hiring, whoever comes about or whoever's in your network?
That's an interesting one, because I think in a lot of our organizations, there is this want to hire primarily Indigenous, and I think it's important to have at the higher levels, maybe on the board, as majority Indigenous. I also think it's not good to ignore that there is so much talent out there with Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks internationally. Mm-hmm. And without hiring that international talent, we would not be where we are today.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's aspects of understanding who's good at what, who brings what to the table. And so when we, like our Indigenous team, which we're about, 80% Indigenous in terms of the actual sort of leadership team, the non-Indigenous folks have to understand that when it comes to sort of the high-level goals, the overarching goals, and sort of the end, the end product, that's where our people, the Indigenous folks who have that lived experience, need to be able to, determine those sorts of factors. But if it comes down to, things like technology and whatnot, leave me out of it, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it is incredibly important to have that lived experience at the table as well, and just ensuring that, we're we're accountable to our communities, right?
You had mentioned earlier about First Nations governance. Is governance the same between most First Nations communities, between bands? Is it the same amongst also the Inuit and the Métis, or do these things vary quite a lot between all of these distinct groups in the country?
Yeah, so like within my communities, we're the Coast Salish, from sort of the Coast Salish nation, but more specifically, we're a Sklallam speaking dialect. Now, we were one of the only patriarchal patrilineal societies, at least from what I know of here on the West Coast. And everywhere else was mostly matrilineal and matriarchal. And there was certainly, a lot more of those sorts of societies. And interestingly enough, it's played an interesting role in our history as a people, where we were kind of the odd man out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, there's so many different governance structures that exist. I mean, when contact with the Europeans happened, there was about 63 nations within sort of the Canadian borders. They broke it down into 619 band councils, 634 today, and then put the same one governing structure on all of them. And now, in order to change your governance structure, you have to go through this process that basically gives up your rights, your title as a people, eliminates your ability to do land claims and sue the government or for anything that's that they've done. And anyways, I'm not going to go down that quite yet, but yeah, there's they're kind of trying to fit a triangle into a circle in many cases.
So when we talk about tokenization of Indigenous assets, I just want to get a clear understanding. Are we talking about, like, maybe I'm an Indigenous artist and I create, let's say, paintings or carvings? Can I tokenize my art on your platform?
So yes, we've had a lot of inbound there, but it's not an area that we've focused on.
Okay.
We're really focused on the natural resource side, the energy side, all of those, the sort of ecosystem assets, and other areas where there are really large markets, and lots of institutional lag, lots of friction, and mostly, a lot of political influence for our people. We've been so subject to, the critical mineral strategies, the clean energy strategies, 30 by 30 goals, all these sorts of things where, because of our inability to really participate in the investment side and the governance side, it's left us quite behind and it's infringed upon our rights. So, we're really focused on those areas, but until we get to a point that we have the capacity to start expanding into other markets, we want to get into those spaces, start supporting the artists, start supporting the smaller entrepreneurs, anything from real estate to public infrastructure to, again, like art and whatever else exists out there. That's going to be a future goal.
So maybe to more clearly understand, so if we're talking about the tokenization of a natural resource, like maybe a gas well or a section of forest that could be logged, how is that tokenized? And can I, just as a random guy, invest in that project and benefit from the value increase that's added when these natural resources are used?
Yeah, so the way that we kind of gather the data is we are a technology company. So we have environmental partners at the table. We have, geologists at the table, and they are gathering the data through, getting their 43 101s and gathering all the environmental assessment data and bring that all to us, where we're able to put that on the network and make it an investable asset. Currently, the focus is really on supporting investment by saying, here's all this value that exists. We are wealthy people, and this will be in the future leveraged or extracted. But as it sits, it's able to attract investment. So Of course, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles, but there's also a lot of regulatory opportunity within the nations. The nations aren't subject to provincial securities regulations. Our rights are derived from the land. They're inherent. It's been proven over 271, probably 72 times by now in Canada's courts. We have the right to self-governance, to land rights. It's I suggest anybody to read UNDRIP or Canada's DRIPA, where it really outlines our rights to regulation, whether that be around our economy, whether that be around our governance structures. And I think that's the path forward into having really decentralized investment into these projects. So it's not these predatory investors coming in, stealing the land rights, creating these fake projects that hurt investors. And one story I always like to tell, I went to a mining conference. It was one of my first kind of mining conferences when I got into that space. And there was this guy that I always met at the little lunches and open houses and whatnot. And he was an old mining guy. I think he was Métis. And he says, you know what? The mining industry is just fools selling to bigger fools. And it's true. And you know what? It's true in a lot of industries. Even the tech space, we see a lot of it, right? And it's, guys going out, making up all this fake data and these fake projects that, oh, look, well, there's this guy's over here that got all this stuff, so we're worth something. And then they get acquired and the project goes nowhere.
Right.
And, oftentimes it comes at the cost of the Indigenous peoples. It comes at the cost of the, investors. And, these are the sorts of areas where we look at, how we can bring this to, the average Canadian. There's a huge opportunity to really utilize cases like the Delgamuth versus British Columbia that upheld Aboriginal rights and title, but said it has to be done in the best interest of all Canadians. Now that's an area that's really open-ended, right? That could mean anything, but in this case, I think it can really benefit one. Advancing, resource developments, but doing it in a way that it's good for the communities, it's good for the investors, it's good for everybody. And I think that's something that decentralization is really going to do.
So when speaking with Aboriginal people in Canada, how easy is it or how complicated is it to explain some of these concepts to get buy-in? We've gotten a good little outreach email together that's taken a long time to figure out what works and what doesn't. Yeah.
It's a long sales cycle, but ultimately bringing blockchain down, like that word can be scary to a lot of people, especially Indigenous folks.
Why especially Indigenous folks?
Lots of mistrust within, the industries. Lots of mistrust with technology. Our communities have often sort of gotten the short end of the stick on a lot of deals, and so I think there's just sort of an inherent mistrust with a lot of newer technologies. But I think this is, and of course because it's exploitative, right? And it's not only exploitative for Indigenous folks, it's for everybody. I mean, we've become the product. And, that is, of course, lots of people are the product of, we're the product of everything. But Indigenous peoples have really had their rights exploited for a long time. And so this is an area when we explain the nature of blockchain, that, you are the owner of your data. You don't have these outside, third parties being able to shut you down. It is really designed from the ground up. It is self-governance. It is self-determination. It is sovereignty. And there's nobody that can take that away from you. That is kind of the most important message when we're talking to our people and really building that trust. You don't have to trust us. We don't have centralized control. You're in control.
When you talk about trust within the community, are Indigenous people struggling with trust amongst each other as well as with outsiders?
Yeah, we hear a lot about truth and reconciliation and all this stuff here in Canada, and what is there to reconcile? The relationship was built on a bad foundation. It was built on lies. It was built on deceit. It's been built on broken treaties. It's been built on residential schools and the doctrine of discovery, basically saying that Indigenous peoples aren't human. I suggest anybody who's listening check out the doctrine of discovery. It's been built on a lot of. It hasn't been built on a good foundation, and so, I'm not one to believe in sort of reconciliation. Nor do I think it's our job to deal with sort of that. I think it's about. There is a lot of reconciliation to be done in our communities. There's a lot of course, with sort of colonization, there's been a lot of harm done to our people, and our people who've been subject to that harm have brought it into their communities. And it is, very evident, right? And it's very common in our communities. And so, I know in my own work, my own community, and it is a lot of just trying to get people to be able to sit in the same room. And, you go to like, a dinner on the res, and you got, one group sitting in this corner, another group sitting in this corner, somebody sitting outside waiting for this person to go, and they're all in the same family, right? And like, oh man, I know, when we're doing our, when we have a funeral, when we have anything, even it's a lot of interesting family dynamics, right? That people need to work through.
Yeah. I mean, that's a human struggle, right?
Yeah.
It's challenging to deal with people, especially when there's lots of history, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of trauma, and a lot of people have taken it home.
One thing we talk about in blockchain is that blockchain is maybe the record of truth, or the issuer of truth, or it is a foundation that can be trusted because it's open source, because it's decentralized, because it's permissionless. And we use these important terms to kind of illustrate how blockchain is different maybe than Web2 technology. How important are some of these characteristics, like maybe decentralization or permissionless technology? How important are they to Indigenous people and for Nations First?
One of the, I think the central issue in our communities is the Indian Act. It has been used across the world, replicated across the world, to commit countless human rights violations, literally all over the world. And we still live under it today. It breeds corruption. It breeds bad governance. It breeds just, hurt. And you can't hold people accountable in it. We've seen elections fraud in our community. We've seen, horrible crimes.
You're talking about like election fraud within Indigenous
governance structures, and there's we've seen corruption around financial management. We've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars going. They're up to hundreds of millions of dollars just disappearing. And you try to contact CERNAC, you try to contact ISC, and it's, oh, sorry, not our problem. And I think if our people had the ability to audit our own communities, our own leadership, they'd be a lot less willing to take 100 million out and flush it down the toilet. Well, not down the toilet, probably somebody's pocket. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so, are you suggesting that blockchain can help with some of these issues, even with the Indian Act in play, or does the Indian Act need to be abolished before this can really change? The
Indian Act is illegal. It is against every piece of our human rights. It's been proved time and time again. It's been proven in every level of court up into international courts. But the only reason we're stuck under it today is because we don't have an alternative. The only alternative is to become a modern treaty nation. You have to sell away your land rights. You have to sell away your human rights. You can't do any more. It's assimilation.
Have some nations done that?
They have. Yeah, my own nation's trying to do it.
And has that worked well?
It hasn't been happening long enough, and one could argue that it is, and one could argue that it's not, but that's depending on what the goalposts are, right? For me, the goalposts are much higher than than they set it out to be. It's about how do we become good Canadians, right? My father raised me saying, you're not Canadian, you're Coast Salish, right? You're Coast Salish. Those are your people. These are our value systems. And so those are the ones that a lot of our people are aiming for. I think we've seen how the financial systems work, how the resource systems work here. And we can say that, history repeats, or, history sort of echoes, and that this system is it's not working for everybody. It's certainly not working for us. And it is really going to have to be built from our people, and these modern treaties are not. They're pushed on by outside people, even in my own community where, all the people on the board there, none of them are actual treaty descendants from our original treaties, and there's even white people, Quanitums, who come on our treaty boards, and they're not actually subject. If you sign these, you lose your original treaty rights. You can't do comprehensive claims over the land. It is like, it is backing you into the corner and then telling you have to give everything away to get out. Right.
Yeah. What's the ultimate vision if you see Nations First in 5 years or 10 years? What are you hoping to see?
I am hoping to see, Indigenous peoples partaking in international sort of resource markets. I see us, becoming a lot more self-reliant in the, the life cycle of these resource projects, these energy projects. I see us really restructuring our governance structures, going back to our traditional governance structures, and also utilizing these technologies just for other, we've built all the infrastructure. We can, if there's somebody that wants to store language data, I want to be able to support them. I want them to, I want to support entrepreneurs. I want to support them in raising their capital eventually, using tokenization. I really want to see Indigenous peoples being leaders, like innovative leaders in these legacy industries, and also like leading in the newer sort of industries like blockchain and Web3. I want to see us, utilizing our rights to the full extent. And, anything from attracting, Web3 talent here and being able to, keep that talent here and make it work for not just our people, but for all Canadians, all anybody living on North America or Turtle Island, if you will.
And when we look at Nations First, we think, okay, you're hoping that your organization can really formulate significant change within your communities. How is the organizational structure of Nations First working? Is it community owned? Is it something that you and your co-founders are operating? How much control are you hoping First Nations people have in local communities of the organization?
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing because I'm big on sovereignty in practical ways. And so us registering under the province, under the Fed, is always an interesting thing to look at, and having a cap table and having the whole structure there. It's interesting to sort of think about, and that's something I would love to get away from eventually and just have it be owned by all of the users. But that's I think it's a little early for that, as we move and have to be agile and deal within the current systems that exist.
You had mentioned earlier that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of had insinuated that being Aboriginal means that you don't have to abide by BC Securities Commission regulations. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, so there's essentially, and it depends on whether you're treaty or non-treaty. There's sort of different guidelines to follow or different precedent to follow. But I'll use I'll use treaty for example. So I'm actually a Douglas treaty descendant. My great grandfather, Hiaquatcher, he signed a treaty with Governor Douglas back in, I believe, it was the 1850s, stating a nation-to-nation relationship between the Choyetsum Sklallam people and the Crown. And that was, there was talk of land surrender, and you can argue on, anyways, I'm not going to go down that whole rabbit hole. Gladly I would, but for the sake of time, essentially what it says is it's a nation-to-nation relationship, and we have the right to develop our economies, our systems as we please. And so that includes all things like securities. And so because we're not subject to the federal government has the obligation to uphold the honor of the crown, and the honor of the crown is the treaties that exist. They've been doing a good job of it. It's interesting, actually, the king came and spoke, whatever it was. I barely paid attention to that. But
I think none of us really paid attention to that, right?
I have no interest
I
in it.
heard he was here in Canada somewhere, right?
Yeah, but what it really shows is that Canada is still subject to the crown, and they have the obligation to uphold the honor of the crown, and a part of that, again, is that treaty. And in that, it says that in other things like UNDRIP and other sort of indigenous human rights, we're not to be forcefully integrated into any of these systems, including securities. And so that's a huge opportunity. We've seen it play out in online gambling, tobacco, cannabis, other sort of industries like that. Even trade and whatnot cross-border. And one of the really exciting ideas that we've been looking at is Web3, right? Token issuances, centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and licensing those, right? And in a way, again, that it benefits all. It benefits all people, that are either from this land or on this land.
Yeah. And you also kind of reference governance on in First Nations communities, where we have kind of these two systems of the elected system and then the hereditary system. In your view, which one of those is the ideal system for First Nations people? Or is both?
I would say there's certain nations that have done better jobs than others at leveraging both. The Tahltan are one. They've created the Tahltan central government.
Where are they?
They're up in northern British Columbia, kind of just up right bordering Yukon there.
Okay.
And they've created the Tahltan central government. They have created a community, owned development corporation model. They issue their own membership, their own citizenship, but they oversee the band councils, which are that elected systems. And so it's sort of it's an early sort of mix of both, which I think is great. We're not going to eliminate the Indian Act tomorrow. It's going to be a slow uphill battle, and we need to ensure, while we do it, we're really looking at our history and starting to redevelop those governance structures as they were before, that really held our people accountable.
Yeah.
So I think it's a mix of both, but it's a slow transition away from the elected systems where we can.
Which First Nation groups in Canada do you see being the most progressive when it comes to adoption of technology like Web3?
So we've seen actually the Malahat First Nation on the island there has been doing some interesting work.
On Vancouver Island?
Yeah. They've been doing some interesting work. We've seen, there's another group, I forget who they're working with, but I think the company is called Kwakala, and they're doing sort of forestry, carbon credit tokenization stuff within a nation. And then outside of here, there's like the Catawba, and they've done sort of like an economic zone. Of course, it's in the United States there, but they've been doing some interesting work. So they're issuing licenses around. I believe it's tokenization, but it is owned by a tribal nation in the United States, and so we're starting to see, things pop up. Of course, we have a lot of inbound message all over. Even New Zealand. The Maori out there are doing some very innovative stuff in AI and blockchain. We've seen stuff in Australia. Really all over. It's a growing space, and I think they're starting to really see the value that exists here. And I think, it's been too early for a long time, but I think we're kind of at that point where we can start seeing some mainstream adoption, and our people are definitely a group that could really utilize it for the right reasons.
What's your message to some of the young men and women, the high school kids in our Aboriginal communities across Canada, in Inuit, in First Nations, and in Métis?
I would say, aim, as high as you want, as low as you want. I know growing up, I didn't know that any of these, I was always kind of entrepreneurial. I didn't know where to put it. I certainly did not think that I would ever own a technology company. I thought you had to be, Mark Zuckerberg's kid or something to do that sort of stuff. And, it is difficult for our people to enter these spaces. But if there's anything that our people are, we're resilient. And that is a really good trait to have in entrepreneurship. And that is something that money cannot buy. And, I would say, having money might actually eliminate that, right? So, I think just being able to aim higher, aim farther, take the risks, and understand where your skills are, and looking at things that people might think of as weaknesses, and really understanding that those are strengths. Really, again, changing up those value systems of who we are, and just read your history, understand your history. There's so much power in it that our people don't know about. We are the fastest growing population, the youngest population here in Canada. That is such a huge opportunity to really innovate, but we just have to do it understanding our history, understanding the patterns, and really knowing who we are, understanding that our history, our power does not come from Canada, it does not come from the crown, it comes from the land, and we have to be accountable to that as we develop our economies.
I mean, you're clearly well read on your history, understanding court cases and the legal system and your own rights, which I think is like you said, really powerful. Where can we find out more about yourself and Nations First?
You can check us out on nationsfirst.io. We can be found on LinkedIn. We're quite active on there. We try to get to these sorts of events as much as we can. We're in Vancouver, we're in Calgary, we're in Toronto. We're more than happy to sit down with people and just learn about what's happening in their communities, how we can do better, how we can better serve them. We're more than happy to spend our time there and our resources there. We have courses that are available for Indigenous folks if they just want to learn more about it. So, nationsfirst.io/learn or something. It can be found on our website. We're on any platform and always open to discussions.
Yes, that's amazing. I really appreciate spending time with you. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Ethan.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.